Welcome to Never Again Is Now, a podcast about anti-Semitism. Today we will be speaking about anti-Semitism and Holocaust education from the perspective of a 19-year-old Austrian. I am Evelyn Marcus, and in addition to being a psychologist, I am featured in a documentary about anti-Semitism, Never Again Is Now. I am a Dutch Jew and a daughter of Holocaust survivors. In 2006, I emigrated to the United States because of the rising anti-Semitism in Europe.
I am Phyllis Zimbler-Miller. I am the founder of the nonfiction Holocaust theater project, ThinEdgeOfTheWedge.com. I grew up in the Midwest in a town near Chicago, Elgin, Illinois. It was a small Jewish community, not a Holocaust survivor community. Our relatives had come the turn of the 20th century to flee the Tsar and other pogroms, and yet in September 1970, only 25 years after the end of the World War II and Holocaust, my U.S. Army officer husband and I were stationed in Munich, Germany, and this changed our lives forever.
As many of you know, Hitler accompanied German troops into Austria on March 12, 1938, and Austria became part of the Third Reich. The anti-Jewish laws of Nazi Germany were immediately put into place in the annexed Austria. Our guest today is Viktor Zlabinger, a 19-year-old Austrian who is working at the USC Shoah Foundation as part of the Austrian Holocaust Memorial Service. The Shoah Foundation is located on the campus of the University of Southern California in Los Angeles. The foundation's mission is to develop empathy, understanding, and respect about the Shoah, the Holocaust, through testimony, mainly through testimony. The Institute currently has more than 55,000 video testimonies conducted in 64 countries and in 44 languages. And the Shoah Foundation was started by Steven Spielberg when he made the film Schindler's List.
Welcome, Viktor.
Welcome, Viktor.
Okay, so let's start. Could you tell our audience about the Austrian Holocaust Memorial Service, which has sent you to the USC Shoah Foundation, and the concept of Holocaust Memorial Service, facing and taking responsibility for the darkest chapters of the history of one's own country. But this is different than collective guilt. Collective responsibility is an important distinction that I would be happy for you to talk about.
Yes, I'll gladly do so. So the concept of the Austrian Holocaust Memorial Service is that it is a voluntary service that can be done by anyone. Now, for a lot of young men, and the reason why there are a lot of male people doing it is that it can be used for instead of the mandatory military service that we have in Austria for all able-bodied men. Now, the concept of the Gedenkdienst is to go abroad and work at a Holocaust institution for usually 10 months. And this is a very interesting work because it's not only about working at that institution, it's also about being a bit of a little ambassador to Austria and also about broadening your own horizons. I can say for myself that it's a truly transforming experience, and I won't be the same person when I go back. And yes, for many of us, and also for me, the reasoning behind choosing to do this is that, in my opinion, and the opinion of a lot of other people, there's this thing about collective responsibility in Austria. See, we weren't at fault for the Holocaust. We didn't do it. Our great-grandparents did it. Most of us don't even know our great-grandparents. So there's nothing we could have changed. We could not change the past, but we can change the future. And that is the goal of the Holocaust Memorial Service, changing the future, educating and working towards proper Holocaust remembrance, but also the fight against contemporary anti-Semitism, because the anti-Semitism did not end with the Holocaust. That's often the way it's like sort of taught at school. So anti-Semitism, 1939, 1945, or whatever, you use the exact time span. But that's not the case. We see it across the US, we see it across Europe. Anti-Semitism is on the rise again, and we are sort of in a turning point in history where it's really getting worse again, partly due to COVID, partly due to the inflation and economic crisis where we are getting into. But whatever the reason is, we need to fight it, and we need to educate and warn of the dangers of anti-Semitism. And this is why I chose to do the Holocaust Memorial Service, the Gedenkdienst here.
So that is, you feel that as your responsibility as an Austrian, from what I understand, from what you're saying. Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct. I think that we all have a responsibility, no matter if you're born in France, no matter if you're born in, no matter where you're born. We all have that societal contract that that one should do its best to fight all forms of hate, but especially anti-Semitism, especially in Austria, because it's our very great grandparents that are responsible for it. They might not be Hitler, they might not be Eichmann, but they were part of a system that allowed this crime against humanity to happen. And they can't be held accountable. They're not here anymore. We aren't responsible for it, but it's our responsibility to the people who were to the people who were murdered, to the people who survived. These people need the younger generations to keep that and keep their memories alive. And that is also part of the reason why I chose the Shoah Foundation, to keep their memories alive, because they might not be here, or they will not be here in 10, 15 years. They're getting less and less. But who will be here will the people who deny what happened, the people who distort what happened, the people who still spread hate against the Jews. And so while the survivors who can tell their stories won't be here in person, it's our duty to keep their memories alive.
And Viktor, was there something specific in your family history that also played a role in you choosing this project?
Well, it's, again, as I mentioned, while my great grandparents, from what I know, were not like leading SS people. I talked with my mother this morning, and it was mainly, as I remembered it, is that they were low soldiers. Most of them, one of them wasn't even at war, and the other one got drafted only very late and died in Stalingrad. None of them were Mengele, but that's not what it's about. It doesn't matter if your personal great-grandparents were the lead perpetrators of the Holocaust. That doesn't matter to the people who were killed. What matters is that their stories are kept alive.
And did your parents agree with your decision to go to this USC Shoah Foundation's project, the Gedenkdienst?
Well, the concern was not about my work here. The main concern was rather about the safety of Los Angeles. But yes, they agreed with my choice to go here.
Okay.
And why did the Shoah Foundation appeal to you more than some of your other choices? And what do you do there now?
So the reason why I chose the Shoah Foundation is that I, and I assume you too, had the great honor to meet Holocaust survivors. And these encounters, first one I remember in elementary school, throughout the lower secondary, upper secondary, through the Austrian service abroad, I had the honor, and I also with my service here, I had the honor of meeting these people, talking with them face to face, asking them questions, and these were profound experiences for me. They had a real impact on the person that I am now. And the problem is, as I mentioned, in 10 to 15 years, there won't be the opportunity anymore to meet a survivor face to face, talk with them about what happened. So it was always, I thought that it was really important to preserve their histories, to tell their histories, also to future generations. And that is exactly what the mission of the Shoah Foundation is, with the the biggest visual history archive of Holocaust survivors, as you mentioned, with the Dimensions in Testimony project, where you can virtually talk to a survivor with pre-recorded answers, and AI matches your question to the answer that the survivor, or the Shoah Foundation recorded with the survivor. in 20 years ago. And that way, we sort of keep that possibility to talk with a Holocaust survivor alive. And that is so important. It's really important to educate people through stories, because these histories don't only tell about the Holocaust, they tell us universal themes about tolerance, about diversity, about empathy. And that is so important to keep their histories alive and make it able for future generations to be also taught with that. And to the second part, what do I do here? Well, the way I encountered you was working at the front desk and greeting visitors, showing students around, and showing the dimensions and testimony project to interested visitors. And also, I was lucky to be working in the communications department, where I often work with a broad visual history archive. When, for example, we're doing a social media post, I might be the person who was looking for that excerpt of a testimony that is published on our social media or on our website. And that work is really important to me, because that way I work with the archive. I listened to and watched so many histories, and that way I would have considered my Holocaust knowledge very good before I started working here. But now, through all of these stories, I know so many details. I know what things meant on a personal level that I would not have been able to learn otherwise. So that work with the archive is a really important work for me.
I'd like to give you, I think our listeners already know what kind of an exceptional person you are, just from what you've said. But tell them a little about how you had to compete for your role. You couldn't just sign up. You had to, you had to be selected in a
Yes,
powerful
exactly.
way. So could you share that?
Yes, so the way it works, that usually roughly 1.5 years to 2 years or so, around 18 months is the best time before starting your service. Most of them start in September. 18 months before that, you sort of join the organization, you learn about how it works, and then because the biggest part of the organization is led by people who, like me, who are doing their service abroad. So it's not like that we have a whole lot. We have a small office, but most of it is mostly it's the candidates for their service and the people in their service themselves. And so you had to, and there were also conferences which were meant to prepare you for your service here. And yes, then it's evaluated who's the most reliable, who's the most interested, and then these people are chosen and are able to do the memorial service, which I will say it depends sort of on the cohort or year where you're doing it, because in some years there might be 20 people interested in this spot here at USC, and in other years there might only be 2, 3, 4. So it's sort of still a gamble, but I am positive that if you are interested and if you're putting in the effort, that you will get sent to the institution that you're hoping for. And it also often is for most people that this is still during our time at school. Obviously, 18 months before the beginning of our service, we start the work the summer after finishing school. So that sort of it's helpful if you're a good student who doesn't need to study for hours, because you do need time for preparing yourself.
But Victor, how did you get selected?
Well, I think I did my work in my department in the service. I think I showed that I was reliable. I think I showed interest. It's no rocket science. It's very much doable to be selected, and yes, you just have to be reliable, interested, and have a somewhat sufficient appearance.
Okay. So now let's talk anti-Semitism. Can you tell our audience some of the anti-Semitism you have heard expressed in Austria?
Yes, anti-Semitism in Austria, it's politicians know. You'd hope that if they say publicly something anti-Semitic, that they will get in trouble. Or at least that's the way it used to be, or the way you'd hope for it. But recent years have shown that there's a steady rise of politicians who are knownly anti-Semitic, who are somewhat known neo-Nazis, who get elected to the highest office. For example, our vice chancellor from a couple of years ago, there were pictures of him doing the Hitler salute. He got elected. There were times where he led the polls. Obviously, he was just pointing to the moon or whatever, and we would never assume that it was actually a Hitler salute. He's doing other gestures of Nazi symbols, but it was just ordering beer, anyways. And that shows us that anti-Semitism, people tend to forget. People tend to forget what that politician did. And it doesn't matter if that picture is taken from 5 years ago. It's the same person, someone who ever does the Hitler salute, whoever does anti-Semitic gestures or spreads anti-Semitic hate, should not be elected to highest office. But we've seen it again. A couple of months ago, there was that communal election in Lower Austria. And a guy who from a couple of years ago, it was discovered that in his Burschenschaft, which is in most cases nowadays a right extremist neo-Nazi assembly of young men, there were books and songs where he's singing about get gas, old Germans, we can make it to 7 million. And this guy is now in the government of Lower Austria. There's a huge problem with anti-Semitism. There's a huge problem with Holocaust denial in Austria. And what we are seeing in Austria, but also in the US right now, is that these people are getting again to the highest power in our country. These people are getting elected to office because people tend to forget what they did. They forget how crazy it is to vote for someone who has openly admired the Holocaust. And now I know this was criticized what happened in Lower Austria, but they're still in power. And we should not rest a day inactive as long as neo-Nazis are in the highest power in Lower Austria or in all of Austria. This cannot happen again, but it's bound to, that these neo-Nazis are getting elected. These neo-Nazis can spread anti-Semitism through their political power, but it starts with words, and that is the problem. He might just only be singing about 7 million, but it starts with words. The Holocaust didn't start with the building of Auschwitz. The Holocaust started with marginalizing Jews throughout Europe. It starts with words, and words lead to action. So if we elect someone who sings about making it to 7 million, like Udo Landbauer did in his Burschenschaft, then this is bound to start actions. And we see that. Most data is now from the US. But throughout Europe, we see a rise in anti-Semitic events and a rise in anti-Semitic violence. In the US, according to the Jewish...
We seem to have frozen for a minute. So I will just say, this is very, very upsetting what Viktor is so compellingly telling us about. Are you there, Viktor?
Yes.
Okay, go ahead.
Oh, my internet connection.
Yes, go ahead now.
So we see that words lead to actions. We see that across the US, we see that across Europe. And we must stand up. We must fight any politician from left or right who spreads anti-Semitic nonsense, who spreads anti-Semitic conspiracy myths. They're not theories, they're myths.
And do you come across anti-Semitism in the population? Well,
in Austria, the general population, there are a lot of, the majority, I hope, is critically thinking. They're not close to hoping for 7 million. They're not close to thinking that the Jews orchestrated the Holocaust. The problem is that there's a lot of people in Austria who have small stereotypes about Jews. The Jews are good with money. They're all in banking. But the flip side of that already broken coin is that is only one step to the conspiracy myth that Jews are the leading elite that want to suppress us. The problem is the COVID crisis and the economic crisis in the US and in Austria are very fertile ground to plant hate against someone. It's always easy to hate someone. It's always easy to say that Jews are responsible for it. It's not easy to say, yeah, there was a lot of federal spending which might have led to inflation and the rising gas prices. That's all difficult. If we just say it's the Jews, that's easy. That is easy, and that is understandable for everyone. And that is why it's so easy to spread anti-Semitism.
Mm-hmm. And have you found similar anti-Semitism in the US?
Well, in the US, it's a bit of a different story because in Austria it's often mixed with Islamophobia and anti-Semitism. In the US, from what I found and what I, especially when we look at statistics, when we look at anti-Semitic events, there's a lot more people who genuinely just hate Jews. In Austria, it's more of xenophobia in general, that we hate everybody who's not Catholic, for example. In the US, however, which is crazy if you think about it, because the great-grandparents fought in D-Day. They might have been killed by the Nazis, and now their great-grandsons are standing on the 405 doing the Hitler salute, which would be a felony in Austria, but it's not in the US, which is still sort of not understandable for me. And in the US, I think the problem in the US is also that nowadays, at least, in Austria, at least I had the privilege of being very well educated about the Holocaust. In the US, however, there's, I think, a big lack of knowledge and education throughout high school, throughout college, about what was the Holocaust. The Holocaust was more than Auschwitz and Anne Frank. It was a system of hate. It was a system of scapegoating. It was a system of marginalizing the Jews that started with words. And I think this broad understanding often lacks in the US.
Can you tell us about your education in Austria? Is it mandated? At what year does it start?
Well, my education about the Holocaust started basically in elementary school when I first met a Holocaust survivor. We learned it throughout lower secondary. I'm not sure if it's mandated, but almost virtually every class, at least in Vienna, goes on a school trip to Mauthausen. And once you stand there in Mauthausen, once you see the gas chambers where our ancestors slaughtered thousands of innocent people, once you see that, that does have a profound impact on me, on everyone. And I hope, at least I had the privilege I went to a public school, but I was lucky with the teachers that taught me. I was lucky with the environment that I was put in. And that's, since it was a public school, you would hope that that is generally the case for the younger generation nowadays. Problem is, statistics show that a lot of Austrians or Viennese people don't even know what Mauthausen is. That might be in part because for a long time in Austria, there was not the sentiment that we needed to talk about the Holocaust. That was the Germans. We were just the first victim. That ended with Kurt Waldheim in the 1980s and 1990s, after it got public that he was probably knew of mass murder in Greece, and he was still elected president, which sort of shows you the sentiment in Austria to an extent. And from 1945 till Waldheim, till 1990, basically, there was the general sentiment, we don't talk about it. It was Germany, we did nothing wrong. And then it started the avalanche that would grow and grow to critically think about Austria's past. But yet again, everybody who went to school before 1990 might not have been taught in school about the Holocaust. And nowadays, with the internet and with conspiracy myths that are very prevalent, because again, COVID and the inflation proved a fertile ground for these conspiracy myths, there's again this rise in anti-Semitism. And then we can talk about how about the anti-Israel anti-Semitism might be very popular under the Muslim population in Austria, even though we love to focus on that because it's not about us, the people who have lived in Austria for hundreds of years. It's about them, and a lot of political parties like to cynically hate against Muslims anyways, and then if we can blame anti-Semitism on them too, that's a good deal, even though these very same parties are often the ones that are anti-Semitic. So I hope, and we should really embrace learning about the Holocaust, because it's not about the Holocaust. It's not about only everything that happened between 1939 and to 1945. It's about what teaches that for the future. It's about how that teaches us of the danger of marginalizing people. And that is, again, where the Shoah Foundation comes in, through dimensions and testimony, through eyewitness, that through testimony, we can create empathy. We can show on a personal level what the Holocaust meant to millions of innocent people.
Coming from Europe as well, like you, I come from Holland. I've recognized a lot of what you're saying, and I can imagine for people who live outside of Europe and grew up outside of Europe, it may be different. But Europe, of course, has lived the Holocaust either as a perpetrator, a bystander, a resistance person, or a victim. And in the years after, right after World War II, those victims who came back from the camps, they often could not talk about their experiences because nobody wanted to hear. It was too painful, not only for the victims, but also for the bystanders, and also for basically all of European society. And then the generations, passed, and the Holocaust became, it was easier to discuss it, and to look into our own role as a country in it. But it's still very painful to accept responsibility and not just say it was the Nazis then. And what we also see now that the Holocaust is further away, we see all over Europe that it becomes easier again to express one's anti-Semitism. It's not so much a taboo anymore.
Yes.
And we also see, and that's similar in the United States, I think, we see a lot of immigration, more than many people like in the receiving country. And so that raises xenophobia, it raises anti-immigrant or feelings, or talking about the others. It's not us, it's them who are immigrating. And at the same time, that also includes, then you see that the Jews are again included in the others.
Mhm.
As part of the general anti-mass immigration animus that we see both in Europe but also at places in America. Do you agree with what I'm?
Yes, especially with the point that you made that the Jews are considered others, which is complete nonsense. Jews have been living in Vienna for hundreds, close to thousands of years, but they've always been considered the others. Even during the emperor in the 1400s, they were still subject of anti-Semitism. And unfortunately, the only constant seems to be anti-Semitism. Jews are part of Vienna. Jews are part of Austria. Nowadays, unfortunately, to a very, very small extent, the Austrian population is only 0.1% Jewish. That is very little. That is way too little. Because also that helps if chances are, if you live in Austria, you might have never met a Jew. And then if you've never met them, then you're even more susceptible to anti-Semitic conspiracy myths. Because if you don't know him, it's easy to talk about them. If you know a Jew, if you live with them, if you're friends with them, you know that that man is not part of some huge conspiracy. And that is also part of the problem, that we always think about them Jews. The Holocaust is part of Jewish history. Jewish history is separate of our history. Jewish history is our history. Our history is, unfortunately, thinking about the Holocaust often our history is often what was anti-Semitic against Jews. But that's one history. There's only one history of Austria, and Jewish history belongs in there, and Muslim history belongs in there. There's one history, and there's not. The second you start with an us versus them, us versus the Muslims, us versus the Jews, who even is us? But anyways, the second you start with that, It's very easy to spread against hate against them. We're in awards, us versus them, us versus them. Makes it way too easy to spread hate, makes it way too easy to find easy answers and marginalizing and blaming innocent people, and words lead to actions. And yeah.
I just want to say that Vienna, I was there in July, past July, has 2 Jewish museums. And the second one is very interesting because it's on the ruins of an old synagogue that was destroyed. I've been doing some research in 1420 when the Jews were kicked out of Vienna. And the Jews do go back in Austria for such a long time and yet they're still considered other. And I also want to just say now that what we didn't speak about, because it's not a political program, but please do think that Viktor's not doing his part in Austria when he talks about working against these political parties. He's very engaged in political activities. But we're just not talking about it in this program because we don't talk about political parties. But I do want to thank Viktor for the fact that he's just not talking about this. He's doing things. And so we really appreciate it. Evelyn, do you want to ask another question before I do the wrap up?
Yeah, please. Viktor, as a knowledgeable young person, do you have recommendations for how these remarks about Jews can be addressed in a calm and educational manner?
Well, it all starts with education. I had the luck of being educated by amazing teachers. Throughout elementary school to the end of high school, I was very lucky with my teachers in history and across other subjects that often also reference the Holocaust. So it starts with education, and it starts with learning through individual stories. Because if you see it blank in a textbook, Holocaust, 6 million, it does sound really bad. There's no denying that. But once you get a step closer, 6 million times this personal suffrage and millions of other times that you barely made it out. Learning about personal histories through Dimensions in Testimony and through Shoah Foundation's archive is an important step in educating younger generations about the Holocaust. And then secondly, once you encounter anti-Semitism, in my opinion, it's very important. If someone says, oh yeah, Jews are good with money, blah, blah. It's important that you don't call them, oh, you're an anti-Semite. It's important to ask, why do you think that? Do you think there's danger in that? Only because we call everyone who has some prejudice against Jews or some other group of people. And then we immediately call someone anti-Semite, neo-Nazi. That just won't help. That's just conflicting, starting even more conflict. It's about asking eye to eye, why do you think that way? Do you think there's danger in thinking that way? And then you might come to reasoning that there's like a whole, for example, when I was in the bus in LA, in a lift actually, the driver I said, yeah, he has a crazy theory about the World War II and the Russia actually Germany. And why did he think that way? I asked him, why do you think that way? And he just mixed up some Pearl Harbor, and it was a crazy theory. But we could sort it out with facts before anything had to get personal, before I had to call him a Holocaust denier or anything. He was just, oh yeah, that's true, I forgot about that, and then my theory doesn't make sense. So if we ask why, instead of pointing the finger and blaming them, asking the why is an important first step when one encounters anti-Semitism.
I think
And
you
then
make
again,
an important point there, yeah.
And there's been a study by the Austrian government through the parliament about anti-Semitism in Austria, and that shows people who believe in anti-Semitic conspiracy myths or hold anti-Semitic prejudice, they're prone to also not trust the generally accredited media. So if we can't reach them through the normal media channel, then it's important that if someone at a family dinner, I know it's not easy to talk about, but if you encounter anti-Semitic prejudice, it's important to ask why. Why do you feel that way? Also, you can go to a synagogue, you can bring them along and see, do these people really look like they're about to start some conspiracy and end the world? doesn't look like it. They're people just like us, and that's the point. Jews belong to Austria. They are people just like us. They're not starting a conspiracy against us.
You were amazing in what you said. Exactly. I hope everyone re-listens and listens again to what you just said. And as we wrap up and I give you a chance for last thoughts, I do want to ask one quick question that you can do in the last thoughts. What are your future plans? Do you think you will continue in this work? What is
my personal future plans? I must say, after working with the archive right now, I could not imagine going back to a 9-to-5 job where I'm doing work that is not, to me personally, not as meaningful as this. So I do hope that I can bring this approach of that I showed in the previous questions, that I could bring that to a political level, to go into politics, to spread awareness for that through the public way, through the elected way. And that is my personal goal. But for now, I'll go back to law school and maybe just combat anti-Semitism the legal way. But again, that's only one small stone. And I hope that I could do a lot more being politically active.
Victor, really, it's been an amazing experience to speak to you. We thank you so much. We thank our listeners. For those of you who haven't yet seen Evelyn's documentary, Never Again is Now. You can see it on Amazon and YouTube. You can read about my play, thinedgeofthewedge.com, and it is professionally translated into German. And I cannot pronounce the title in German, so I will not try, but it is available in German too. And remember, as we end every program, we say, whenever you can, without putting yourself in physical harm, speak up against anti-Semitism and all hate.